Another day, another video about Sid the Kid Crosby. Yesterday, we already spoke about the idea of Sidney Crosby heading over to Montreal because he and his agent both spoke to Pierre LeBrun and gave their own opinions on what's going on there. Sid is a very good hockey player. One of the best in the NHL still, a consistent 90-point guy the past few years who had 33 goals and 58 assists in 80 games played with a bad Penguins team. The captain of Team Canada at the Four Nations, over a point per game at that tournament. The captain of Team Canada at the World Championships, well over a point per game at that tournament. And likely a candidate to be another leadership force on Team Canada's Olympic squad in Milano Cortina 2026. Sidney Crosby is phenomenal. The Pittsburgh Penguins are definitely not. And now we're talking about Sid the Kid heading over to Montreal because of all the connections he has to the Habs. Between Canadiens fans at the Four Nations just cheering their heads off when they announced Crosby's name, to the fact that Crosby's own dad was drafted by Montreal. This has been a pretty big discussion, and we've dove into many conversations about it. But today, I wanted to turn your attention to this article published by Charles-Alexis Brisebois on DonLesCoulisses.com yesterday. It talks about the Sidney Crosby situation holistically, and the Montreal Canadiens, how they play a part in all of these talks. It'll be linked in the description. The article is in French, but I translated it to English via the Google machine. The article goes on a few tangents. It talks about Crosby and Montreal beer. It talks about the interviews where Crosby goes out there and talks about a cold beer. There are some conversations about him finishing his career elsewhere from BPM Sports Talk Radio. And then there are the comments made by Pat Brisson and everything else. This is a pretty holistic article that talks about all of the info so far. Is Pat Brisson using the Montreal Canadiens publicly like he did in the Pierre-Luc Dubois situation a few years ago? I don't think Crosby needs any leverage in potential negotiations, but the question arises regarding Brisson, even if he would not say anything publicly without the agreement of his famous client Sidney Crosby. And then there are some comments from Josh Yohei, how he doubts Pat Brisson would say anything like this without Sidney Crosby's consent. And if you scroll down even further, it talks about some other teams, the Canadiens, the Kings, the Avalanche, and then we dive into this here. The article talks about the Olympics and whether or not this super competitive environment in 2026 will fuel Crosby's desire to play in the playoffs. If he feels that Montreal is the place to do it, he might consider it more seriously. After all, we've seen how he's increasingly opened to the idea of leaving Pittsburgh. On this subject, Pierre Maguire, who was on the Sick podcast yesterday, stated that in his opinion, it would take more than Michael Hage, David Reinbacher, and a first-round pick to convince the Penguins to let their legendary player go. And linked is the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro episode, which features Pierre Maguire on the show. I wanted to dive into that. This revealed sort of trade price for Sidney Crosby and whether or not this actually makes sense. Now, let's dive into each of the assets involved here. Michael Hage is Montreal's second first-round pick from 2024. Their first-round pick was, of course, Ivan Demidov. Hage was taken 21st overall, and if there's anybody that's projecting to have a similar sort of Jack Eichel play style in terms of the way he moves and how he sees the game and the skills that he has, Michael Hage might be that guy. Now, I don't think he's going to be a 90-point scorer in the NHL like Eichel is, but he plays kind of an Eichel-light type of game. And after his freshman season with the Michigan Wolverines, where he was a point-per-game center, there's a lot of potential in Michael Hage as he continues to grow and develop in the NCAA. Meanwhile, you have David Reinbacher, who is looking like a potential top 4, top 3 stud defenseman long-term. He's had some injury issues, yes, but he's only 20 years old, and he still has that 5th overall draft pedigree that he had acquired back in 2023. For all intents and purposes, Reinbacher is tough to evaluate because of his lack of actual development time, and the fact that his first season after getting drafted wasn't all too great because EHC Kloten totally sucked in the Swiss League. But Reinbacher still is a valuable piece. He's somebody that the Montreal Canadiens chose to keep over Logan Mailloux. They see more projectability, they see a higher ceiling, they see more pedigree out of this guy. And ultimately, when you think about the trade price, Michael Hage, David Reinbacher, and a first for Sidney Crosby, I can see where Pierre Maguire is going with this, and he even says in the article, like, it would take more than Hage, Reinbacher, and a first to trade for Sid the Kid. I honestly have to agree with that. Like, so far, everybody's been talking about hypothetical Crosby trade prices in the realm of, oh, it would take 2, 3 first-round picks and then another roster player and maybe a really good prospect. You would fetch a haul if you were Kyle Dubas trading away Sidney Crosby. Michael Hage, Reinbacher, and a first is like a starting point. If I wanted to try to fix the trade, make it all equal, maybe you're thinking about 2 firsts along with these 2 prospects. Maybe you're thinking about a first, these 2 prospects, and then a reasonable roster player like a Jake Evans or something. That becomes a little bit more projectable in the short term for Pittsburgh as well as the long term. They would really allow themselves to benefit from grabbing these younger assets. And the idea of Michael Hage developing in a quite bare center prospect team like Pittsburgh, this would give Hage the ultimate opportunity to become that next Jack Eichel and to expand on his dynamic rush attacking offense, which combines inside drives, flashy dekes, and give-and-go playmaking. For David Reinbacher, this guy could be essentially everything you needed Ryan Graves to be, and then some. Long term, if this guy is playing his Moritz Seider-esque game in front of Artur Shilov's, I actually do think the Penguins could be setting themselves up for some pretty reasonable success. It all comes on the cusp of a Sidney Crosby trade, though, which of course is not guaranteed, which of course is something we cannot even project into the next little while. Frank Seravalli spoke about this on Bleacher Report, saying that he tends to believe that a Sidney Crosby trade is not one that would happen in season, so he's not really expecting something this year. But before, okay, we're not going to say before. Sidney Crosby is not going to get traded before the 25-26 season. If anything, it's going to happen after the year or around the trade deadline. It depends on whether or not Sid himself decides that his future is better served elsewhere. And for Montreal, if this is the starting point, I want you to let me know your thoughts. How do you feel about Michael Hage, Reinbacher, and let's just up the ante. 2 firsts for Sidney Crosby. 4 premium assets for Sid the Kid. We already saw Montreal trade away 3 pretty good assets in Heineman, a first and a first for Noah Dobson. The price for Sid is probably a lot higher. So I want you to let me know your thoughts. How do you feel about the territory in which we are exploring here? Do you think this is appropriate? And if not, what do you think fits the bill more for both Kent Hughes and Kyle Dubas? Sid the Kid, everybody. The article that we read is going to be in the description down below. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about this trade idea? I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.